Hello, everybody. It's Heather with the Leadership with Heart podcast. And today I'm thrilled to bring you Francesca Luthi. She is a guest on the show. And I just looked at her background, looked at the company, looked at the work that they did. And I was so curious to find out a leader like her with an organization as large as that there is, that she's overseeing it's from some capacity, how you can continue to be a person who is focusing on people. Often in organizations, we think that when you get bigger and you're scaling, who has time for that? So I have you on here to really talk a little bit more about that. So welcome, Francesca.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here.
So tell everybody who's listening where you are right now anyway in your leadership journey.
So I'm a perennial learner, and it's really been a hallmark, I think, of my career journey. I worked in different industries, really loved understanding kind of what made, businesses tick and operate, and similarly have held a number of different roles. Started off kind of early in finance, went into communications, that begot marketing, then also had an opportunity to really oversee HR functions. And in many cases, again, I was learning a new discipline and had the opportunity to get to know and build teams. And I've always found that to be wildly rewarding, because you're able to really think about how do you build on, what others have done, continue to drive change. And that for me has been incredibly energizing over the years. And so I hope to continue to do that in potentially again and continue to build on that here in Assurant and in the future.
And I wanted to just have it stated for the people who are listening. So how many employees are there?
15,000 in 21 countries. So we're big and broad.
Big and broad. And you're the chief administrative officer. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. So that it makes sense. That background you have, you would need to have like a broad, types of background and responsibilities for you to be able to be in that CAO role, right? For an organization, because you have so many hats.
Correct. And I think, again, I mean, it started off obviously as I was brought into the company really to lead our financial communications, but at various points in time in our evolution, had opportunities to take on more responsibility, again with that change mandate. And then most recently during COVID, it was, we created the chief administrative role to fold in also HR, in part because we recognize the profound impact not just the pandemic was having on our people, but the criticality of making sure that we did our best and utmost to support our people in turn, right? Support our customers, and ultimately really think about, driving value for our shareholders. So it really came to the point around there's value actually in looking at those three stakeholder groups and really serving them and connecting it. And again, that was the transition and what really gave birth to this chief administrative officer role.
Wow. And so what is it that drives you to lead? Because to take on this type of a beast really is what it is. You have to really have some kind of internal drive for it. What is your drive to lead?
I think it really starts again from the innate desire to drive change, and I'll say change for the better. I always think about growing up as a child, we moved around a lot for my father's job, and I had to, constantly adapt and at times, right, I would meet things that I either didn't agree with or had challenges. And my mother used to say, well, if you don't like it, you have to change it. And probably one of my most impactful managers during my career used to always refer back to Gandhi's quote around, be the change that you want to see. So pretty simply, I really do aspire to that. I hope to live true to that. And that really does drive me on multiple fronts.
What does that, when you think of like the name of the podcast, Leadership with Heart, what does leadership with heart mean to you? What does that immediately come into your mind when I say that?
I think it's going back to, some of the principles around empathy and understanding who you're there to serve. And again, the notion around, servant leadership, I know it's sometimes overused, but it's true, right? You're not there as an individual, you're there to support and mobilize and really help support the potential of many others, but, in front of you. And that's the first thing that comes to mind. And again, that whole principle going back to empathy is, how can you possibly lead a team or lead an organization if you don't fundamentally understand what others are experiencing and feeling? And so that's where that connection back to caring leadership comes in.
I love that so much. So I'm curious to know that, so how many direct reports do you have?
So I actually have a pretty broad group, so about 9 now
Oh,
currently.
okay. That's a
Yeah.
lot. That's a lot. Wow, that's a lot to
Hmm.
take in. How do you manage that? Because 9 people is still a lot if you're having to try to meet with them and make sure you're there for them. How do you
Yeah.
manage just doing that?
I think the whole notion around care, and it's no different than as sometimes I apply the same principle, at home, is that at various points in time, right, your attention needs to go to the area that requires it most, or ultimately where you think you can help support and advance things differentially. I don't aspire to micromanagement, and to your point, with 9 directs and a broad 500 plus organization, you will never be successful at that. So how do we make sure, obviously, that we spend the time where it's required most? And in many cases, certainly if I think about some of our priorities as a CAO leadership team, a lot of this year will be around some of the development programs that we're trying to launch. So that's currently where I'm spending most of my time.
Oh, very cool. Okay.
Yeah.
So those 9 directs, how would they describe your leadership style? Like what words would they use to describe you?
Probably a very passionate and values driven person. In addition to, I think, some of the change agent monikers that I mentioned before, but I care deeply. I'm unapologetic about it in terms of just making sure that we're thinking through and doing, really, again, taking into account who we're there to serve, what the outcome that we're trying to drive. And of course, in big organizations, sometimes you have to really advocate and advocate hard for what you think is
Mhm.
appropriate. And again, I'm not shy about doing that for what I think is right and what I think is right for the organization.
You use the word serve a lot. I am curious to know, was your father's job in the military?
No,
Ah,
but he was actually, it was in shipping. So we just moved
ah.
around quite a bit, but I did have the chance, as we lived in different countries, to meet with other families. I mean, some were from the military, or because, again, just the broader expat community and the rest, but had an opportunity again to see different cultures and live and experience that, which was a gift. And that carried through certainly into not just my personal life, but also professionally, just being used to operating in different environments with different realities, and
Mm.
just super, I try to be super attuned to it, because we tend to generalize a lot. And I think we miss, what's special about either individuals or mobilizing teams in that regard, if we tend to, generalize in that way.
Oh, I like that so much. I think with me and the whole like, seeking to understand things, so that the listening thing that I
Yeah.
do, it is so much about diving deeper. So you have to remove like any of the biases and the generalizations. You have to try to really peel those back as you go into your interactions,
Yeah.
so that you can get to the truth of the matter. Otherwise you're getting to your truth and not their truth, and it doesn't serve them or you, really, to be honest, in the end. So I like that frame that you just placed there. It's super helpful. So for those who are listening right now, they're like, wow. I mean, I think that they can already see how emotionally intelligent you are, how balanced you are in your thinking, but how people really are at the center of that. It's not just process, it's people too. So can you describe for them maybe a time when maybe you feel like you didn't lead with heart, or you didn't show up as much as a caring leader that you want to be, that you strive to be? Can you share a specific story about that? And then maybe what did you do to come out of that and kind of become more enlightened in the process?
Yeah, and I'm sure there are many, because I think we all grow through experience. So I think also just being vulnerable around the fact that we don't always show up the way we want to, but it's your point, what we learn and what we take away. I mean, one of the things that I thought about, certainly, early in my career, I had opportunities to do different things and step into new roles, and I was often the youngest. Sometimes I was the only woman or the first person to try this or do that, or I wasn't, right, the subject matter expert, but I brought some other things to the table. And I recall early on, when I was first promoted really into a substantial role, I recall there were comments around, well, why her? And why was she picked for this? And, this doesn't make sense. And it was, there were a lot of just, rumors and commentary, and it bothered me a lot. I always thought I could connect and get along with people, and I took it very personally. And I went to my manager and shared my perspectives of how inappropriate all of this was, and I asked him to help me put a stop to it. And he said, no, flat out, no, you need to handle this. And I did a lot of introspection at the time, because what I realized is I was so focused on me and how I felt. And I didn't really understand that this was about change, and the fact that not it wasn't maybe a positive outcome for everybody, or it was unsettling in terms of what it could mean for job security, for other considerations. And that was, a moment where I just said, wow, I thought I would realize that. And I didn't. In the moment, I didn't. But again, through retrospection and introspection, I kind of came around to it. And I went out and, met with the various individuals and acknowledged the fact that I was, these are the reasons why I was put in the role and what I'm trying to drive, and the fact that I would need their help. And again, being vulnerable about what I knew and brought to the table and what I didn't, and the role that they would play in support of the organization, really connecting it back to, the broader purpose of what we were trying to achieve as a group. But again, it showed me that sometimes, again, we can be very more self-centered, and in the recognition that you kind of have to be really attuned to what's going on around you in a much deeper way. And that's really, one of the things that I thought about as you were asking me the question. That probably wasn't one of my prouder moments in that sense. And I've learned,
And
obviously, from that.
how long ago was that again?
This is probably 15 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what do you do now? Were there like stop gaps, or like, I don't know, triggers or something you put in place to kind of, so that you, if you felt yourself going down that same road, you wouldn't do that again?
I think it's in general, right? I think whenever there's, friction in the system, and either, I don't agree with someone or have a different point of view, I always go back and stop and say, why are they coming at it from this perspective? And
Mhm.
recognizing that it's not about either me or not what I'm trying to advocate, but there's a lot of common ground that you can find, and that's just generally the approach around just, where is their level, either a meeting point or some common understanding, or am I just taking this, again, personally, when and I have to acknowledge, right, that this is a lot of change. So it's just more around the
Mhm.
recognition and the pause, as opposed to, I think, sometimes as new leaders stepping into roles, right? You want to be the change agent at all costs. You want to come in with your 90-day plan. It doesn't matter what happens. You have a sense of accountability and driving results. And the reality is, you got to pause, right? Bring people along. It's like the classic, change curve,
Yeah.
and really articulate, where you're trying to go, and be self-aware around their limit. You need people, you need a team, you need to operate as a group if you're really going to drive that change. And that's really the general, I think, wiring that I've tried to bring forward. It's simple, but I think sometimes in
Mhm.
those moments, right, we kind of lose sight of others, and we kind of really hunker in terms of what we're trying to do. In the I, right, the I becomes a pretty
Mhm.
dangerous, I think, a dangerous leadership quality.
Yeah, at the company that I own, it's called Employee Fanatix, and we focus a lot on helping organizations bring people along through the listening process and change. So like whenever um, they want to implement some kind of new thing. Well, most of the time they're not doing a great job of listening, and that listening process and the action and the
Yeah,
closing the loop afterward brings the people full circle, makes them feel like they're heard through the process, so that the buy-in is there, because the change is
yeah,
going to go nowhere if the buy-in's not there. And then
yeah,
it's just like a top down thing, and then that just going to leave people a lot of hurt feelings. I've been reorgs and mergers and layoffs, and I've gone through all those kind of major things you have at work, and thinking through in every single one of those situations, the kind of the low, let's say, priority that listening played in those processes for the executive leadership team. It was really sad. And so then in the end, they wondered why the results they got weren't the results they wanted.
yeah. No, I think that's
Right.
spot on. And then I also think, certainly in the last few years, it's also the vulnerability factor, I think, plays into that too. because again, I think we all have these, images of leadership, the all knowing, that's not true, right? So, and we all know
No
that's not
way.
true.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so just the humility to recognize, what you can bring, but as part of a broader collective, I always talk about like a, puzzle with my team or a quilt, right? Because at the end of the day, it's only right. The image is everything put together. You don't, I mean, the one piece isn't going to create that image. So
So true.
so just being able to really be upfront. And I think that comes again, with over the years, right? Just that broader confidence around knowing where you don't have it, or knowing where,
Yes.
you need help. And I wish, that sometimes when I get asked the question, like, what do you wish you knew that? Like just being vulnerable and just, I think that is super empowering in many ways, and liberating too, right? I think you really do bring your best if you're able to show a very balanced picture of what you bring and maybe what you don't have.
And I do in my last book on caring leadership, I talk a lot about selective vulnerability. So it's like, when things get tough, you're not just going to like go in as a leader and like be, crying on everybody's
Oh,
shoulder, but right. But you do have to say, yeah, it's a tough day. Let me just let me take a moment. I'll be with you shortly. And when you come back, go, yeah, there were some things, but here we're going to work through some of the solutions.
yeah.
But just so you know, this is going to be a tough road. And so let's like work through this together. Yeah. And having that, no, I love that idea of just like understanding that tool, that like being just open is a tool and it is accessible to everyone, and you choose how you do it and don't. And it's such a critical part of leadership, this leadership journey we're all on, right? It's just amazing.
Definitely. Mm.
So now we're at the point of the podcast where you get to ask me a question. It's part of the leadership
Excellent.
of the podcast host. So what do you want to ask me?
Well, when we were starting to think about caring leadership, and I mentioned certainly it does. I think it's more critical today than ever, and certainly we've had, we've come out of a pandemic. We've recognized all of the silver linings around empathetic leadership. We talked about vulnerability at a time when we were all invited to each other's homes and navigated that. Um, when I think now, right, and obviously all the pressures that companies and leaders are facing, how do we make sure that we don't lose sight of what caring leadership is, and thinking about as we're all making difficult decisions? Some are staffing related, and how do we make sure that we bring that forward, and continue it and build upon it, and really show and demonstrate to companies that it does drive better business results, right? Being a caring leader can have that opportunity. And I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on that topic.
Yeah, I mean, on the first part where it's like, how do we remember? I think so. What I had attempted to do in that last book on caring leadership was to give. So there's 9 behaviors in there, and I was trying to give some meat to this concept of care, because can be such a nebulous concept. So I
Hmm.
wanted to put some meat around it to say like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so they could actually say, oh, we do this, we do that. So I would just say, like, if your goal is to be more of a caring organization, that would be something that should be then reflected in your values, reflected in your norms.
Hmm.
What is it that you accept? What do you not accept? What do you punish? Like all those things, like what's on your performance reviews? What do you give bonuses for? Like it goes down all the way down
Yep.
to how do people act day to day, and what do we accept and what do we refuse to accept? And I think that's probably the best way. So like every action or every change you're looking to make or every implementation, does this tie back to the caring behavior, the caring organization that we promised ourselves first and our people next and our customers that we were going to be? And then measure and gauge yourself against that consistently and constantly. Like you can't let it go. I always find like clients will work with me. If they work with employee Fanatix, if they're with us for a few years, they have to be, because when I remember I was sitting at this table with all the executive leadership team of this oil and gas company, and luckily there was a CAO actually that was there. He was intelligent enough to understand it, but someone goes, so we just did this and we did that, and we're like moving up the list of top workplaces. Is that it? Like, are we good now? Like now we've listened. I'm like, yeah. And I'm glad I didn't have to respond, because the chief administrative officer for that company said, well, wait. Number one, in all fairness, this is going to take some time. Like we're not going to see tons and tons of movement until we get to year 2 and then year 3. It's how it is, because we have to follow the process through so that people can finally feel like they have power at work, for people to finally feel like they have been heard at work versus being victim to things being done to them at work. And so I appreciated him. He didn't use quite those words, but him kind of advocating this idea that this is not a one and done. This is going to take time. Change and improvement is not something that happens overnight, even not even in a year. We're going to see this in 2 and 3. So just calm down, slow down. It's going to happen, right?
I know, definitely. And I think, I mean, and also, right, just if I think about just caring leadership, there's sometimes, to your point, it comes sometimes across as softer, or sometimes
Yes.
also in conflict with running a good business.
Mhm.
And how you treat, how you show up in those moments of of challenge, um, matters even more than, proverbial good times when there's a rising tide, right? But there is a bit of this impression that, they're somehow in conflict with each other. And so just really thinking through that too. And I mean, I'm passionate about, again, as I used the
Yes.
word before, driven and purpose-driven companies need to ensure, right, that they cohabitate with the two. And you can be a
Mhm.
caring leader focused on delivering results that improve, right, the stakeholders that you're there to serve. But there's such I worry a little bit. There's this view that, well, no, they're kind of at odds, or that's kind of softer stuff. I'm like, no, that's just how you're going to be successful.
And that's why I tried to, well, like for my research for the book and the interviews I took from this podcast for that last book
Hmm.
on caring leadership, I interviewed Gary Ridge, but there were lots of other people who weren't part of publicly traded companies. They were like entrepreneurs. And I talked to them about maybe shifts that happen in them first. So let's say the CEOs first, the shifts that happen in their minds first, how it then cascaded to their leadership team, and then how it went down. And I remember my conversation with Gary Ridge, and he was talking about, Gary Ridge he's the chairman emeritus of WD-40 Company. And he's really huge on culture, and he was for many, many years. And he credits his shift in mindset to a people first culture to really driving a massive market cap increase at WD-40 Company. So, when he first started, he was like a few hundred million. It went to like, 2 point something billion. And by the time he left, and again, all of the things that he put in place with his leadership team, it was like, I don't know, 3.5 billion. And so the growth was massive. So the numbers were tied in his mind to all the action, first the action that he took to really transform his mind and educate himself, and then how he cascaded that down to his leadership team, and then downward, and how they kept people accountable was pretty amazing. So
Yeah.
it absolutely is tied. And that's why I really was purposeful for people who exactly are, as you described, who want to know how you tie that to metrics or outcomes. I talk to people and interview people that I want to ask them, like, how did you become the number one Salesforce consultant in the world? How did you do this? And the things that they would say, and how, and they really just said it was because we shifted from this outcome kind of focus to this people focus, and that gave us the outcomes we were looking for. So
Yep.
yeah, it's good stuff. Such good
Very
stuff. I
good stuff.
love it. So for those who are listening right now, who, might just be at an interesting crossroads in their leadership, they could be in a large organization like you, they could be in a small team or a team of one. It could be anything, but they're wearing a lot of hats. How do they keep that kind of inspiration going? What are some of the things you think they should do, or be focusing on, some inspiration points for just remaining a leader with heart?
Yeah, I go back to, again, some of the lessons around, vulnerability. If I think about, I'll use, the COVID broader experience around, we let people into our work life, everything, right? Homes on Zoom, or recognize obviously what it meant for someone to go into the workplace during the time when we didn't really know what was happening relevant to the pandemic. But everybody shared kind of their stories and their perspectives, and that doesn't change. You don't put that back in a box. So how to think about, how does vulnerability help people connect better with you? I think that's important. I share often about, my son with special needs and the journey we've been on. And, life is truly a box of chocolates, and you don't know what you're going to get. And it doesn't make it worse. It may not make it better, but it will be your experience. And it shapes who you are and how you think and how you operate. And I think just letting people have that context and that ability to connect is super powerful. Um, and so share again maybe some of those pivotal moments or journeys that made you who you are. I think that would be certainly one point that I would make. And then similarly, as we talked about empathy, just again, this active listening, don't assume, especially true in today's workplace where inevitably we're more distributed. A lot of the interactions are more transactional, right? You're on a Zoom call, you get off the Zoom call. There's no time really to ask, how are you doing? What's going on? And so again, just you need to constantly solicit, just to have a perspective around what they're experiencing. Otherwise, I think it all comes down at the end. Maybe you will lose a great employee because you didn't ask the question or you weren't aware, and that's really that's probably the greatest regret, right? When you're unable to connect or assume certain things, and it goes in a different direction.
Yeah. Oh, I've spoken to people on here before, and folks that were back book when they were talking about like missing, like really having a lot of blind spots, missing the signs. And so recognizing the unsaid is such an important thing to be. And the way to do that is people say, how, but how, but how, but how? Well, it's that whole idea that you said earlier, Francesca, which is the pause. It's the pause. It's the opening your mind to what's happening to the people outside of you. So it's not just about you going back to your original story of like, the thing that really helped you grow as a leader. I always say like self-leadership's a part of it. So we have to have a focus on us. We got to care for us. We have to work out. We have to eat well. Like we have to do the things we need to do to care for us. And we have to do that at home. We have to do that at work in order for us to be able to spill into other people to really fill them up. But there is a difference between that and just like full on narcissism or full on like just total self-centeredness where we can't sense the needs of other people around us, which is where your empathy is coming from. So I love all of this. You're just feeding me right now in a big way.
Right back at you. No, it's and again, I mean, I think some of the examples, and as we talk about, the importance of storytelling and kind of crystallizing a lot of this, one of the things I've shared is I recall when I took some leave from my son, and I was again in an executive position at the time, and I'd had to be stepping away out of my role for 3 months. And I remember just how concerned and nervous I was to ask. And I share that all the time because everybody again goes through those moments, those decisions. And again, obviously, I got the support of the organization, of my broader team. I was very fortunate in that regard. But just, how I felt in that moment, having to ask, and just, recognizing that we all go through some of those challenges. Everybody does. And it doesn't matter where you are, in your career journey. It doesn't matter what the issue may be. We've all experienced significant discomfort or challenges around that regard. And just being able to say it and express it, I think to your point, is important. And I think it also reminded me this notion around, self-care. Knowing when you need to step out, and ultimately enable other people to step in for you, or take on broader opportunities.
Thank you. This is so awesome. Of course, now I'm going to have my dog barking. So this is life, right?
I should bring
This
my
is
cat
life.
over, and they can meet. Usually you see a tail. There you go, crossing my Zoom screen.
Sorry about that end part. We'll see if we can get her to shush for the last minutes. But so for those who are listening right now, if you found great, just allow all the content, the conversation to be really good and enriching, please do share it far and wide. That's how other leaders grow. And it is your gift to the world to be able to do that. When you share it, you help them grow too. So Francesca, this has been so wonderful. I'm so glad I said yes and you said yes, and that we're here together. And it's been great. Thank you.
Likewise. No, thank you so much. And can't wait to read your upcoming book.
Oh, thank you. And thanks everybody for listening to Leadership with Heart podcast.